In central Bosnia, there's no shortage of firewood, but 18 months of war and an unhealthy diet have reduced people's resistance to hypothermia and sickness. In towns like Zenica, which are dependent on humanitarian supplies, but which haven't received any for a month, desperate people are selling their last few possessions to raise money for food. The obstructiveness of the Croats, who've closed the main supply route from the coast, is also causing problems for the new British regiment in central Bosnia, the Coldstream Guards. Much of their winter kit is still 200 miles away in Croatia, which means soldiers guarding the camp against local thieves are shivering in temperatures of -10 and below. But the main concern is for the 1.5 million Bosnian civilians who are reliant on the outside world. On this occasion, the cargo coming from Serb-controlled Banja Luka is 150 victims of Serb ethnic cleansing. The refugees in these British lorries have all had to pay about £100 and to sign over all their possessions to escape the tyranny of the Serbs who want to rid their part of Bosnia of all Muslims. Despite its revulsion, the West has been powerless to stop ethnic cleansing. In fact, the peace proposal on the table in Geneva is acceptance of it. Protecting this human traffic has been one of the British Army's most important jobs. But central Bosnia, which will form most of any new Muslim state, is running out of safe places to house the refugees. Concern about the ineffectiveness of the flak jackets runs right through the ranks, especially as the main threat to United Nations troops in central Bosnia is from snipers and not artillery. They regard them as little more than heavy body warmers. They're designed to stop shrapnel and low-caliber bullets, but not the deadly rounds fired by Kalashnikov rifles carried by virtually every militiaman in Bosnia. In the British operational area of central Bosnia, the Croats, seen here in trenches near Vitez, are having a difficult time holding back an increasingly successful Muslim-led Bosnian army. More and more Western politicians are blaming the Muslims for holding up the peace process and consider that the UN humanitarian effort is merely prolonging the war. The Liberal Democrat leader, Paddy Ashdown, who's been in Bosnia this week, is outraged at suggestions that the UN should stop its feeding program once the winter ends to coerce the Muslims into agreeing to peace. Last night, the Dragoons, with their light tanks, rolled into Vitez en route for Srebrenica, the town the UN promised never to abandon. This will be a new departure for the British. For the past year, their job has been protecting convoys. In Srebrenica, they'll be peacekeepers, guaranteeing the lives of up to 40,000 people surrounded by the Serbs. That is, if they get there. By lunchtime today, British troops in the remote Bosnian mountains were in touch with home. A Christmas family video link, a high-tech morale booster, as the government is deciding for how long the army will keep brokering peace in a war which seems to be insoluble. Douglas Hogg arrived in the Bosnian mountains after crossing two front lines, the Muslims and the Croats, to visit the British base at Vitez. The job now is to help food and supplies get to the cold and hungry this winter. Mr. Hogg's task is to advise the government on whether the British Army will be here much beyond that. This was the first private relief these people had received this year, at the besieged and battered Croatian pocket of Nova Bila. They didn't hold back their welcome and their gratitude. With these supplies delivered, there's hope that other convoys will get through as well, both to Croats and Muslim villagers trying to stay alive. Vitez is used to the violence, but for the Coldstream Guards it was the heaviest battle since they arrived to peacekeep last month. They went on a high alert for the first time and into their bunkers.
We had the gunfire and the artillery, and the alarm siren went off. And we knew that was get to your shelters as fast as possible.
The British Army lost one of these armoured personnel carriers this afternoon, hijacked by renegade Muslim troops out of control of their main command. The vehicle was protecting an aid convoy heading north with winter supplies for victims of the Civil War. The attackers were young, rough, violent men. The British troops couldn't stop them without risking lives. The area of attack is one of the most lawless in the British sector, a confrontation zone, Muslims to the north, Croats to the south, bandit troops in the middle. In the summer, 3 Italian aid workers were dragged out of their vehicles and shot. Only this week, the British helped another convoy through, The troops are respected and can talk to both sides, but not the bandits. Snipers opened fire on the convoy, hitting 5 trucks and killing a driver. Despite the misery around them, British troops keep the Christmas spirit. They worship in the gymnasium of the battered Vitesse School. It's now their base headquarters. The chaplain appeals for peace. The troops pray for their families in England.
The UN troops here, men of the Coldstream Guards, were hardly on a peacekeeping mission anymore. Rather, they were dangerously close to grave-digging duty. They were present finally at the site of a mass grave in which 27 Croats lie buried. The question to be decided, and it's an important one, is whether they were the civilian victims of a massacre or soldiers shot in a battle which they lost. It was a baffling task. The dead were mostly men of military age, but one had been killed by a machete, and access was denied to another 25 on the battlefield. The attack began in thick fog, and before dawn on the Croat-held village of Santici, the defending trench line was overrun. At least 10 Croatian soldiers are missing, reinforcements were unable to get through to them, and British troops trying to patrol the road were shot at. Early casualties included a 1-year-old boy shot dead and 3 children seriously injured as they tried to flee from their homes. Some 50 to 60 civilians are still missing.
There were some civilians by Santici. Do we have moved in?
As the fighting got ever closer to Vitesse, the British were moving out desperate civilians to relative safety in armoured personnel carriers. It's an old problem for the United Nations. They seem to be helping ethnic cleansing. In fact, they're saving lives. Late in the day, beyond this roadblock, demonstrators attacked a British Warrior armoured vehicle. The British fired a warning shot to disperse them. The Warrior got through, but the aid did not. Tonight, the aid route remains closed. No convoys have moved, and the villagers whose action is born of despair, they can to keep the aid route open. They've cleared the obstacles that were left by the villagers, but have a harder time when the barricades are human. 5 UN convoys were due today to head north through the mountain pass. 4 of them didn't even attempt it. The 5th was a small group of military fuel trucks. Even that met some resistance. They were allowed through reluctantly, but only because there's nothing here that people can eat. A convoy of food is going to be treated differently. The Bosnian government has given assurances to the UN that it will secure the route, but its police have been ordered out of the way by the local people. The Coldstream Guards have drawn the Arctic shift, and Mr. Hurd, before going out into the cold, took breakfast with them this morning. His visit is part of what he calls a substantial weighing process of whether or not they should be replaced when their tour of duty ends in mid-May. He and his officials emphasized there was no question of a unilateral withdrawal of British troops. But with neither peace nor ceasefire in Bosnia, the troop-contributing nations are wondering how much longer they can go on.
What the British troops have been through here is seen most clearly in these images taken from a warrior commander's turret. The dead were everywhere, nearly all of them civilians, many of them elderly. That is the pattern of this war. Under sniper fire, the UN troops set about the grimmest of tasks, removing these victims from their homes. Provisional casualty figures are 200 dead in this sector alone, some of them shot in cold blood.
All the aid organizations working here are aware that the environment in which they operate is becoming increasingly hazardous.
It's very, very dangerous, and I think anybody who intends coming out of this part of the world in whatever capacity has got to realise they're coming to a war zone and they're taking a risk.
It was a story of tragedy, courage and endurance under fire. In one bed was David Court, an ODA driver and former warrant officer in the Royal Marines. He'd been shot in the back. In another bed, his colleague Simon King, with wounds to the arm and leg. Both were lucky to be alive. The third man, Paul Goodall, wasn't. They had taken no unusual risks. They were on their way to their hotel in Zenica last night when they were hijacked by a group of 4 men, armed, bearded and uniformed, later joined by a 5th. They were driven to a spot beside the river Bosna, 2 miles out of town. They thought as hostages. It was worse than that. The pallbearers were Coldstream Guardsmen whose duty it normally is to protect the aid workers. And at the same time, the British UN battalion is trying to work out new measures to increase the security of the aid operation. Paul Goodall was the first Briton, military or civilian, to have died since the Guards arrived nearly 3 months ago. The body was taken to the main UN headquarters at Kiselyak. From there it would be moved by helicopter to Split and flown home tomorrow. The Guards who saluted Paul Goodall, himself an ex-soldier, are now back on duty on the main aid route through central Bosnia, where not only the aid workers have been shot at, but so have the soldiers themselves.
He's fired 4 shots. There's the second splash, okay? Yeah. What we've done is walk across, line the suicide up, lie down. It's either the house on the right, there's been movement down there, but we haven't had there was 2 kids down there as well, so we couldn't engage.
The attack from a Croatian-held village was on a small British supply convoy with an armoured escort. One of the shots narrowly missed the commander of the scimitar armoured vehicle and ploughed a furrow in the snow behind him. UN troops are now looking for a way of turning the road into more of an aid route and less of a shooting gallery. The second man out of the trench survives the first bullet, but not the second. It is a merciless and brutal war through which the aid operation is supposed somehow to resume tomorrow. The overall force commander, General Jean Cot, was visiting the British battalion in Vitez this morning. Though he has in effect been relieved of his command after a row with the Secretary General about air support for his troops, he is soldiering on until his replacement arrives.
Malcolm Rifkin's visit to Vitez was intended to help decide whether British troops should stay in Bosnia, but that issue's been partly overtaken by the events in Sarajevo. And even the British, traditionally against airstrikes, are saying something should be done, as the British are vulnerable to retaliation, while the UN launching airstrikes and becoming a combatant could threaten the all-important aid convoys which they're there to escort. The recent shelling of a smaller British base at Gorny Vakuf was a reminder of the dangers facing UN troops already. Nevertheless, at present there's little doubt British troops will stay on, and probably with a more robust approach. British warrior armoured vehicles were brought in a deliberate demonstration of strength by the UN commander in Bosnia, General Rose. They lined the route, threatening the Croats in the overlooking hills, and the convoy passed unscathed. Heavily armoured, the warriors are being used to spearhead the UN's Get Tough approach.
Most of the rockets fell short of the main complex where artillery shells are said to be made, but an oil tank and a machinery room were hit. There were no casualties.
The timing was not deliberate, but shortly before the first airstrikes, British UN troops, men of the Coldstream Guards, moved out through the mud and the broken villages just north of Sarajevo to establish fixed positions and try and secure the ceasefire between government forces and Serbs. They are still there, in increasingly uncertain circumstances.
Bulletproof up here, sir.
Home for this platoon is a ruined house. There is no other kind in this neighbourhood alongside no man's land. The observation post looks out across the front lines and over the valley to Poljina in Serbian-held territory. There, French troops are guarding heavy weapons in one of the collection points. The Serbs want their guns back and have mined the access roads. For all UN contingents here, there is a real danger they will be seen less as peacekeepers than as targets.
We obviously are ready, we know the risk, and I think the Serbs know that we know the risk.
You could be targets?
Anybody could be targets, either for shooting or for attempted capture.
Our dress state has gone up, our policies for moving around outside, carrying weapons all the time, obviously, helmets, flat jackets on, and just basically moving around professionally from point to point so that we don't present ourselves with targets and easy shoots for those that wish to take us on.
What happens if they do?
Then we're ready to take them back on again.
The forward observation post is right on the front line, just 10 yards from the nearest Serbian bunker. Relations with the Serbs have been more restricted since the airstrikes, but the Major is still able to talk to them about the weather and the war.
The ordinary soldiers in the trenches are desperate for the war to end, as they are on both sides. And really that's the clear message that comes through.
The only daily contact between the United Nations and the Serbs is here at the local and frontline level. If today's talks at the top level fail, then the UN will eventually be driven out of Serb-occupied territory, the heavy weapons will go back into Serbian hands, and it's hard to see how the ceasefire can hold. Martin Bell, BBC News, on the Serbian front line. The multinational force, 350 strong, French, British, Egyptian and Ukrainian, gathered at the airport intending to move on to Gorazde at noon. But the plan itself was a triumph of hope over experience, and the troops settled in for a long vigil, the French in their way, the British in theirs. Even around them, the ceasefire wasn't holding.
We will not move, as I understand it, unless there is a political agreement for freedom of movement and for a an UNPROFOR force in Gorazde, and so obviously there would have to be a ceasefire for that to be effective.
But there was no ceasefire, and word spread among them of a worsening situation. The French had reports of an airstrike, not confirmed, but General Rose was believed to have ordered close air support after Serbian tanks entered Gorazde. The town has no defences. This is the British UN front line on the road to Vagošća, just north of Sarajevo. In the hills behind, until this morning, there was a forward observation post right up against the Serbian front line. But the Serbs attacked at 5, and the British withdrew in the fiercest exchange of fire since the supposed ceasefire began.
As a good suppressive amount of firepower went down, we kept the heads down. Basically, we told them in very polite terms, don't mess with us, and I think they got the message.
The British covered their withdrawal with more than 500 rounds of machine gun fire, 30 rounds of cannon fire, and they destroyed 4 bunkers.
Most recently, on the stretch of route that we're going to drive shortly, the main problem has been civil unrest, and by that I mean local civilians who have been halting convoys with improvised roadblocks and then clambering onto the trucks, ripping off the tarpaulins and stealing the aid. We think we've cracked this one with a lot of help from the BiH civil and military police.
The main road, which comes up from Gornji Vukov to Zenica, that's kept open by the Coldstream Guards. The British battalion, they keep the road open. They have a tunnel system which makes the road secure, which means that the aid can come up. I mean, our aid, when it comes up, it goes to the Vitez pocket, where it feeds the Croat population. It comes into central Bosnia, where it feeds primarily, I must confess, the Muslim population, but then there's a Croat population here, and there's also Serb pockets which we feed. And throughout the whole of Bosnia-Herzegovina, of course, we feed all 3 sides. And we're very proud of the fact that we feed all 3 sides. And we're very proud of the fact that we are able to get to most towns in all 3 sides. And the very fact that we had a British military presence on the ground boosted the morale of the non-governmental organizations. In addition to that, they escort our convoys out. And again, that gives the convoy drivers a lot of confidence. They have, in my opinion, they've made an invaluable contribution to humanitarian aid in this area.
BRICBAT's close communication and cooperation with local officials has helped to stop incidents of civil unrest which have disrupted aid delivery and endangered drivers. This liaison effort has also led to other trust-building tasks, including casualty evacuations, body exchanges, refugee crossings, and infrastructure repairs.
One of the tasks which we do get requested to do are CASEVAC tasks. We've got one at the moment. One such request has come from 3 Corps in Zenica, the BiH side of life. They will request us to go into Stari Vitez, which is a small Muslim enclave inside this HVO pocket, and collect a casualty and deliver him to Zenica for them. For obvious reasons, they can't do this themselves.
You know, only 18 months or 2 years ago, these people were living next to each other. Now they're separated by a double line of trenches, and anything we can do to get them back together, even if it's only for half an hour, and even if it's over a grisly task like exchanging corpses, is better than just staring at each other from 200 feet away and sniping at each other. If you can talk to someone, have a bit of a joke with them, share a cigarette with them, or what have you, you've established human contact, no matter how small it might be. And that, step by step, can lead to much greater things. It's a slow, very patient process, but it is working.
It's going. Stick his out. Stick up his ass.
2 seconds.
Toasted. It's fucking kebab. There's a kebab there, isn't it?
Oh! Survivor.
Oh, he survived the first one. You've got to see if he can live again.
Saved by the bell.
Like Guy Fawkes. Hey, upside down, that's an awful, that's horrible way. Hey.
This brick, upon you see before you, is an original brick taken from the Hoodoo farm in the year 1815 at the Battle of Waterloo. It was here at this farm that Sergeant Graham of the Coldstream Guards earned the title of the bravest men in the British Army by physically holding the gate against a series of determined assaults.
a sight to see on Christmas morning. Mo, how the fuck can you wake up to him? I'm far better looking.
Yeah, but you're bold.
Oh. Merry Christmas.
Jump.
Let's move now to the kitchen, where Cinderella is slaving away. Slaving away. Cinderella should be slaving. Cinderella is now slaving away. Cleaning the mud. As she slaves away, in walk her horror sisters. And I want to hear you heft here, because they are horrible. Let's meet first of all. Yeah! Gonorrhea the Coon! Yeah! Victoria E10! Yeah! And finally, the most revolting ugly creature, Thomasina Lovegrad! Let's now go to the party. Hurry up. Let's go now to the party. First of all, Prince Charming himself.
For you, I must sing thee. Please say you will.
This is the Malbat body armour that we wear when we eat. It's an extraordinary piece of equipment, but it does hold food, I'll give you that. Right, here we go. St George's Day traditional English breakfast. Yippee! Look at that. There we go. The bacon, the sausage, the beans, the eggs. Yum, yum. Yippee! The time, it is only 0650 hours. And Sergeant Joins has already polished off 3/4 of a bottle of rum. That's known as gunfire. St George's Day. And this man is called George. They're putting 2 and 2 together means the day was called after him. So it's George's Day.
Bring me my bow of burning gold. Bring me my arrows of desire. Bring me my spear of cloud unfold. Bring me my chariot of fire. I will not cease from mental fight, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand. And what shall be the land building here, among the
It says, for the commanding officer and all ranks from the colonel of the regiment, St George's Day. I am sorry I cannot be with the battalion on St George's Day, but please accept my best wishes as you enter the closing stages of your very challenging tour in Bosnia. Much of the legend of St George is wrapped in mystery, but it is known that he stood for courage, chivalry, and service to others. These fine qualities, which have been the hallmark of the Coldstream Guards in campaigns stretching back for more than 300 years, are undoubtedly at a premium in Bosnia today. Good luck as you follow the example set by our patron saint, and may you soon have a safe return home. And it's signed, Nulli Secundus, Willie Rice.
St George never did this!
So what kind of burgers have you got then, Thomas?
I don't rightly know, sir.
Go on, Flynn, there he is.
I'll tell you about the passport, sir.
Tell us.
It's been happening for the last 6 months. We're quite used to it now.
The runners-up of the tug-of-war with the NAD, but the winners were Echelon.
When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, Speaking words of wisdom, let it be. And in my hour of darkness, she will standing right in front of me. Speaking words of wisdom, let it be.
Jelly babies.
cost of appeasing the Serbs. The Americans, who tend to believe this, have criticized the UN Special Envoy, Mr. Akashi. He, in turn, accused them of conducting a policy that was timid and afraid because they don't have troops on the ground. That really angered them. One or the other. Good. Yeah, we put that on the tape.